Wanted to try something a little bit different today, and instead of making this video from a random MMO of choice, which is kind of what I normally do, I thought it'd be cool to play some single player games, some RPGs that are on the list, which I've never really gotten around to, and start to work through some content that's actually unique and original, and then find a way to add a little bit of diversity to the channel by sharing that with others. But the thing that I struggle with is I don't ever want to stream content, because that's a good way to take something which is a personal, fun, hobby kind of experience and transform it into a job, basically. And there's no probably faster way to kill the desire to play games than to put yourself in a position where you have to entertain an audience 24/7 while you're playing them, and play them all the time because you're obligated to. And it's hard to play a single player game and also be entertaining an audience. It's hard to listen to the audio, all of these things, when you're trying to make content out of it. So I like to play single player games by myself completely for my own benefit. And so what I can do here, though, is to take a recording of a previous play session and then sort of use that as the background while I'm talking about whatever I would normally talk about, which may be random things or something limited, something about the game that I am playing. And in this case, Tomb Raider. So I was playing Tomb Raider earlier, and I am a total noob. I don't know what I'm doing, really, just getting started with the game and having a little bit of fun with it. I never played Tomb Raider before till I got it on the recent discounted Steam sale, and have been getting started. And I thought, first of all, it's really interesting that this game is a 10-year-old game now. 2013, I believe, is when it came out. And the graphical quality of the game is, in my opinion, pretty incredible. Like, I would play this game and look at it and think, wow, this is incredible. If it was released today, I would think that looks like a pretty good game. And so maybe that just puts into perspective how with MMOs we get so used to having bad graphics, and we love the games for reasons which are completely separate from the graphics. It's not really about the graphics of the game. That's like the cherry on top. The reason why you play an MMO is for that sense of a passive presence in a world, the passive immersion, being able to directly or passively network with other people while you're playing. But a single player game can do a lot of things that a MMO just absolutely couldn't. And that's where I've been thinking, maybe I want to pivot a little bit from always playing MMOs to play some other games as well, because there's a lot you miss if you're always just grinding in a MMO and you're not playing some of these amazing RPGs that you're not going to play any one of them forever, but you can certainly get a really good experience as a unique and memorable experience that you don't have to make last forever. And I think that's the main difference. It's kind of like watching a movie. You're not going to watch the same movie forever and ever. You're going to play it until you get to the end, and then you're going to say, wow, that was a really amazing experience. It was a great story. It was a great adventure. And then you're going to probably do something else after that. Anyways, combat-wise in Tomb Raider, one thing that really stands out to me is I've gotten used to tab target combat. I've gotten used to the idea of having a health bar that's just sort of a number, and the more you hit the monster, the more the number will go down until they die. And in a game like Tomb Raider, the first thing that stands out to me is that the possibility of one-shotting a opponent right out of the gate is much more viable. Like, you can take a starter bow and arrow and get a headshot on an opponent very practically in Tomb Raider, whereas if this was an MMO, you would probably not one-shot anything in the tutorial time period right after you make your character. You would continue to mash your skill combos until you worked your enemy's health bar down. So being able to kind of realize that accuracy is more important than just using numbers to spam an opponent with some sort of cycle of combos is just a different and more satisfying experience in its own way. And I think having the different dynamics of combat elements in a single player RPG is just, it's refreshing after getting used to the way MMOs play. I think combat in MMOs is just not really all that great, and probably the copium sets in and people say, oh, it's great. Well, yeah, maybe there's some MMOs that have better combat than others. Like New World's combat is pretty good compared to others. BDO has pretty good combat compared to others. But when you compare that experience to a single player game where there's just a lot more options to create a sense of impactfulness and consequence as you move through the game, it's just, you know, there really isn't any comparison. So I've definitely been enjoying the dynamics of different combat styles in the game. I've noticed so far it seems like a very easy story to follow, and I haven't gotten too far. But overall, other than a few pretty simple puzzle sort of situations where you kind of have to figure out what to do, it seems pretty self-explanatory to play Tomb Raider because it's very cinematic. Like you're going through a predetermined path, and there really is only one place to go. There's only one thing to really do. So you just go from one thing to the next. And another thing that I thought was interesting is a lot of the Tomb Raider elements of gameplay are sort of a pseudo cutscene, where it's basically a cutscene, but it's not exactly. Like you're navigating through a narrow passageway, or you're balancing on a beam or something like that, and you're not really at risk of falling off. You're not really at risk of anything happening, but you're going to still have a little bit of keyboard interaction. You're going to press W to make your character move forward, but it's not like you really have to have too much actual dexterity to navigate through the situation. It's just going to play out. It's just it's a sort of a hybrid. It's a cutscene, but it allows a little bit of interaction so that you feel like you're playing the cutscene, and yet it's still, at the end of the day, it's a cinematic. And Tomb Raider seems to have a lot of nice cinematics that make you immersed in the story and also create a lot more of a sense of action without adding very much difficulty. And I think that could be something that a lot of people are, maybe some people like and some people do not like, but that does seem a little bit interesting. As for story, the story seems to be pretty simple. It's kind of just Tomb Raider girl is going off to find a sort of a mysterious place, kind of like a Japanese version of the Bermuda Triangle, and there's obviously some sort of tombs there, or something in the general style of a tomb, and there's bad guys who are there to prevent her from being there, and that's really the gist of it. And if you try to go there, you're going to probably crash your ship, and if anyone comes to try to rescue you, they will probably crash. And you know, I think that's it's a pretty simple storyline. Like there's not really a lot of depth to it, I don't think, but it does feel like there's more meaning to the story than just a arcade game, and it does make you want to kind of know like what's going on, what's the end of this story going to be about? What am I going to discover when I get to the end? And that's something that I think is nice. It seems like sometimes MMOs are guilty of this. They try to create a really deep, really long story. And the reality is there's not that much content. So there's a lot of fluff in there, and there's a lot of over dramatization to try to find a way to make it seem like there's more content than there really is. And then that gets frustrating at some point, because you wind up realizing you've spent a lot of time questing and you don't actually even remember what exactly happened in the end, because really nothing happened. The world is exactly the way it was when you started playing the game. Even if you played the game for 5,000 hours, the world is still the same. Maybe you have a better understanding of what the world is about. Maybe you have a better understanding of the lore, but in a measurable way, the world is not going to materially change, because your character is going to continue to remain in it for a permanent amount of time, and you can't make any changes with your narrative that are going to dramatically change other people's experiences, because it's a shared world with other players. So having a story that's more cinematic, more simple, and most of all, something that just has a beginning and a middle and an end, it makes it a lot more enticing, I think, to quest through something like that, because you really have this sense of, I'm going to do this for a period of time, and I don't necessarily want it to end, but I also know it's not going to go on forever. So I am invested in knowing what the story is. I am invested in being immersed in the experience, because I'm not just trying to get to the end so that I can begin playing the end game. Getting to the end is the end of the game, and that's a really big distinction. But anyways, so I like to tie in a little bit of philosophy in with the different things that we talk about, and I don't know what the moral of the story of Tomb Raider is. I don't think that Tomb Raider is really a particularly philosophical story. Maybe there's some philosophy in there as we get further in, but right now I don't know very much about the story, other than these folks crashed on a mysterious island and are trying to make it through what ultimately turned out to be a pretty rough situation. But what I do think is there's a certain resonance to this sort of a disaster story, right? Where you're going about your business, you're trying to live your life, and then you find yourself in some sort of a chaotic situation that you didn't necessarily plan for. You don't know exactly what is going to happen. You don't know for sure if you're going to make it out. You don't know if the people who are your companions, the people who you're sharing your journey with, are going to survive. And suddenly you go from that routine everyday life, just making your way through the motions, to having to figure out how to survive. And I think then there's this sense of adventure. There's this sense of excitement, because now everything is fresh again. And it's a mixture of the daunting fear of how do you deal with something that you didn't sign up for necessarily, but you're thrust into the action. And also the sense of excitement that you have a purpose of something to strive for. But the point is, you don't necessarily have to go seeking adventure, probably. Adventure finds you when you are not necessarily exactly seeking it. And when that time comes, then you do what you need to do. You pick up the mantle and you carry it forward. You don't necessarily have the strength to face your adventures until you're thrust into some sort of a situation where you need the strength. And then you go out there and you start moving forward. And that's something I think we could all probably relate to. I think it's interesting how in life there's so many examples of people looking for ways to maybe find meaning in life through crisis, because when you have a crisis, you have a purpose. And when you take the crisis away, then it's easy to become lost, because there is no progression. There is no, what do I go do next? There is no thing you have to survive, because your life is just sort of maybe on autopilot. And that's a low risk, low return situation to be in, where life is good, but it's also not giving you that sense of excitement, that sense of adventure, that sense of uncertainty. So maybe sometimes we go look for adventure, but looking for trouble isn't the way to go either. And I think what you really need to do is you have to learn how to be at peace with your life. You have to learn to enjoy the times of harmony and the times when you have well-being. And then you also have to know that there will come times potentially when you have to up the ante and then be the hero of your story. But that shouldn't be all the time. And as with all great adventures, most stories have a good beginning and end. And they open strong, they end strong, but they don't go on forever. And that's something that we have to maybe also come to terms with, the fact that our adventures aren't forever. They're something that we do for a time, and then we get to the end. But that's really what makes them meaningful, isn't it? Knowing that your life isn't forever, knowing that you're going to be doing something for a period of time, and then you're going to get to a point and you're going to put it on the shelf, and somebody else is going to have that experience. It'll be new for them, but you're never going to have that new experience again. And that's maybe just learning that endings aren't necessarily a bad thing. I think that could be something. Another thing I was thinking about here is, you know, in the story of this game, Lara is trying to make her way up to this transmission tower to send a signal for help after their ship crashes. So that's what she's ultimately doing. And then she gets up to the top of that tower and sends that request for help message, and the plane comes to rescue them. And then the plane crashes, and it turns out to be this whole, I guess, anticlimactic thing where, you know, she thought she was going to be rescued. It looks like it's good news all around. And then just a little while later, suddenly, that's not how it works out at all. And life is filled with a lot of false flags, isn't it? Where you think, you know, life's going to be okay. Like we finished going through the motions, we've got there, and then you think you've got to the end, but it's not really the end. It's just a pause before the next chapter. And maybe you think that you worked your way through some sort of trouble, and it turns out the trouble isn't over as soon as you thought. Or maybe it's that you think that your story is over too, but it's actually much closer to the beginning than you thought it would be. So maybe that's also something to remember, that things that we think are the end oftentimes are just a stepping stone to the next chapter, the next quest that lies ahead. And we have to look to ourselves for a sense of strength, and also have faith that when all things are said and done, our story is going to be one that is memorable and meaningful and worth remembering and sharing with others. So, Tomb Raider, that's the game for right now. And, you know, it's not bad at all for a game that was on a very, very good Steam sale. Till next time, thanks so much for watching.